Mike Pence took to the floor of the House of Representatives back when he was a congressman, and here's the speech that he gave right after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans.
Mr. Speaker, Katrina breaks my heart. When I consider its tragic aftermath, the ancient parable comes to mind, and the rains descended, and the flood came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. For most American families, when a tree falls on your house, you tend to the wounded, you rebuild, and then you figure out how you're going to pay for it. Later today, Congress will continue the work of funding the relief and recovery from Hurricane Katrina, and well, we should, by speeding more than $50 billion to FEMA and other agencies. But as we tend to the wounded, as we begin to rebuild, let us also do what every other American family would do in like circumstances and expects this Congress to do. Let's figure out how we're going to pay for it. Congress must ensure that a catastrophe of nature does not become a catastrophe of debt for our children and grandchildren.
Could you imagine looking at the devastation, the human toll that Hurricane Katrina brought, going on the floor of Congress and making a point about debt? No, now's not the time to discuss penny pinching, you immoral clown. Now's the time to talk about they get a blank check. If there was ever a time for a blank check, it's when a very important city in your nation just got wiped out and hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, died and lost everything they had. And you're going to go talk about debt. We don't want to turn a human crisis into a crisis of debt or whatever he said. This, almost in a caricatured way, proves the point that we make. Why is it they only want to talk about debt when it's something that affects you? Whenever it's a war, Mike Pence doesn't go give a speech. Oh my goodness. This is going to cost so much money, and what are we going to get out of it? Never. Never, ever, ever. Whenever it's corporate welfare, never. Whenever it's subsidy for the big banks, never. Whenever it's the money for ExxonMobil, $4 billion a year, never. These guys will never bring up debt or being a deficit hawk or being a fiscal conservative in the context of money for corporations, tax cuts for the rich, unnecessary tax cuts for the rich, war, never. The only time they bring up debt, natural disaster relief. Oh, please, we have to be careful. We have to pinch our pennies here. So when it's for saving lives, rebuilding after a natural disaster, unemployment insurance, things that help poor people or middle-class people, then it's, oh my god, we can't afford it. Can't afford it. Can't afford it. We can afford $7 trillion in Iraq. We can afford $2 trillion in Afghanistan. We can afford the 800 military bases we have around the world that cost $100 billion a year to maintain. We can afford all that. But Katrina, oh, don't turn Katrina into a crisis of debt. These are the kinds of people that we're dealing with here. You determine whether or not you think their priorities make sense.